Well, good evening et soyez les bienvenus ici chez nous. I'd like to welcome all of you. It's very pleasing for all of us who have been organizing this conference to see so many different people interested in what we have got to say. My task right now is to introduce our speaker. I'm very pleased that she did put some of her introduction up here about herself, and that AM says a lot about who she is, and she's a member of the Order of Australia. So she has been recognized for her work on aging and the spirituality of aging in Australia, in a wider context of what Australian culture is. As well as that, Dr. MacKinlay is a registered nurse, and she still has her license. So she started life that way and continues to consider herself a nurse. She's an Anglican priest and will be preaching or giving the homily at St. John the Evangelist on Sunday at the 10:15 service there on Elgin Street. And she is also a practical theologian and the founder of something that we're very interested in here, which is the Center for Aging and Pastoral Studies at Charles Sturt University in Australia. Charles Sturt University is the e-university for the whole of Australia and has about 35,000 students. It's called CAPS. So CAPS is multidisciplinary, catering to the needs of health professionals, ministers of religion, pastoral workers, and older people. And given that this is an aging society that we're now living in, it's very interesting for us to learn from others. And that's something that we're trying to do here at St. Paul. It seeks to examine the process, CAPS seeks to examine the process of aging within the context of meaning in life and well-being. It operates within a Christian ethos in an ecumenical and university setting. Dr. MacKinlay is also best known for a book which I used and where I discovered her when I was doing my thesis, and that is The Spiritual Dimension of Aging. She had done some very good bottom-up research and came up with some very interesting findings that convinced me that there are some of these issues of spirituality and aging must be considered together. And some of your findings were very interesting because your population sample was very broad. So what she's going to talk to us tonight about is the spiritual dimension of life, not just aging, but the spiritual dimension of life, because I think so many of us in our culture have forgotten that spirituality is an important part of life. And we don't talk about it because we think it's religion, which we think is all about dogma and doctrine, when in fact spirituality is about who we are and the choices we make. So I would like just to say that aging is a spiritual dimension of life. And I'll give you Dr. MacKinlay. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. It's very much my pleasure to be with you here this evening. Mind you, I only arrived in Canada sort of not 30-something hours ago or something, so I think I'm in Canada, I think I'm in Ottawa. That's what I'm operating on. And so I look forward to sharing with you this evening. So, what does it mean to grow older in the 21st century? Does it matter when we grow older, what context, what culture, what period of life? And I think we need to look at does the aging of societies, what does it mean for Western societies in the 21st century? What are the opportunities? What are the appropriate role models for older people? How we age. And you know, we often talk simply about the care we give to other people who are aging and in need of care. But what about broadening this out to our whole life journeys as well? And so I want to begin now with actually going to the words of a poem that were written quite a long time ago, and some of you may be well familiar with a line or two of this. I hope I've got this thing. Robert Browning, his poem of 1864, a very different society at that stage, but he put ageing into a context. And I ask now, does that context speak to us today? And, a long time ago, I came across Grow Old Along With Me, The Best Is Yet to Be. And that was about all I knew, but there's more to it. And isn't it good? The last of life for which the first was made. Our times are in his hand, who saith, a whole I planned. Youth shows but half. Trust God, see all, nor be afraid. And that is a very long narrative poem, which I refreshed and Googled again recently, if you wish to have a look at the rest of it. But how much of how people grew older in the 19th century is relevant to us today? How much has changed? How much has remained the same? In many respects, while life expectancy has increased markedly, medical and social sciences have made enormous advances over that time. It seems that our attitudes about ageing have stayed very much the same. And in fact, some ways, Browning's words show a more optimistic view of ageing than is held by some today. We who live in these rapidly advancing societies have not kept pace with the new possibilities of ageing. We haven't kept pace with the possibilities. In the 21st century, Western societies are facing ageing populations of never before experienced proportions. Often government policies rely on the biomedical paradigm of ageing, of loss, of decrement and disability, and use these models to construct models for health and service provision in later life. However, there is much about ageing that is not genetically determined or even related to physical diseases. Social and psychological factors have a large impact on the way that ageing might be experienced. And yet, even taking on board the knowledge from those sciences does not constitute the entire picture of ageing. The spiritual dimension of ageing is also important if we are to consider holistic ageing and not simply the ailments or dis-ease, as we heard earlier today. Here, I'm seeing spiritual related most broadly to meaning in life. And I want to quote from Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was very important in my own doctoral studies, and he wrote that the biological and psychological dimensions of the human being can be understood in unity once the spiritual dimension is brought into play. Without this dimension, we see only determinant and reductionist views of the person. And too frequently, our healthcare systems see only the reductionist view of the person. We need to see people whole. And so if we only see the determinant and reductionist view of the person, we will limit the experience of life. It is necessary to see life whole, including the spiritual dimension. And I will come back to dwell a little bit more on spirituality per se and what it is later in my paper. So what are the possibilities of ageing in the 21st century? It's important to see generations within the context of the societies in which they live out their lives. However, classifications of generations can be both helpful and unhelpful. Members of a particular generation will exhibit a number of commonalities with other members, such as culture, educational opportunities, lifestyle, and health resources. Yet at the same time, they will differ in numbers of other ways, influenced by personality, health potential, that's your genetic potential, and the way that these complexly play out in the lives of individuals. The coming cohort of baby boomer aging simply accentuates these factors and really underlines how we need to think differently about what it means to be older in the 21st century. So, just a little bit about baby boomers. By 2011, the leading edge of the baby boomer cohort was turning 65, thereby beginning their time of aging, remembering, of course, that we're aging from birth. And we need to look at life holistically. However, our focus here is on that latter part of the lifespan. This generation, this baby boomer generation that has pushed all the boundaries throughout their life journey until now, will they continue to do so as they grow older? Or will their aging simply resemble the aging of those who passed before them? And so, essentially, will baby boomers change aging, or will aging change the baby boomers? And it's something that bears some thought. And I have to think about the baby boomers as third person because I'm pre-baby boomer. It's anticipated with the baby boom. So that's one of those things I think that you can take away and think about. And there are a whole lot of implications there. But it is anticipated that a much higher proportion of baby boomers will be able to live longer and healthier lives than generations before them. So the previous models of care and expectation of what ageing holds for future generations of older people must continue to change. We cannot stay with one model. Aging is not the same always. There are so many factors involved. In a recent study that we conducted with the leading edge of the baby boomer cohort, and we took people who were born between 1946 and 61, many of them looked to the way their parents had aged to predict their own forthcoming experience of aging. Sometimes this was with hope. At other times, the other extreme with fear. Between those two views were those who thought they would simply slow down, downsize their homes, and enjoy life as much as they could until they died. Is the experience of growing older always the same for each succeeding generation of older people? And should we be looking at new ways of aging? And I want to move for a moment to an ethical perspective on this. Gale in 2012 took an ethical perspective in response to United Nations report on global population aging. And she, I think wisely, called for new narratives to accompany these profound changes in societies across many parts of the world. And so, new narratives of aging. We can no longer age the way our parents and grandparents did, for a number of complex reasons. We do live in a very different world. Physically, socially, economically, technologically, politically, spiritually, any kind of dimension you want to mention, there is change. And the new narratives that we might use and develop and hold to ourselves as part of our identity are probably going to have to be fought for through many contending priorities within different societies. So, baby boomer aging is set to challenge much of our existing knowledge and understanding about what it means to grow older in Western societies. But how much baby boomers can place their unique mark on aging has yet to be seen. whatever it may be, baby boomers may need to act quickly before they become frail or lose the power to push for change. Think about it. Once you're frail, how much can you be an advocate for change? I would say there's probably quite a few baby boomers in this audience. Think about it. So, using new lens to see the possibility of ageing. We're beginning to understand more about growing older and the potential for finding meaning in the later years. And here I want to draw on some of the work of Mary Catherine Bateson in her writings in 2011. She was writing from an anthropological perspective, and she noticed that longevity is not only about longer time as old, but has actually changed all the life stages. Importantly, she sees this as a new evolutionary stage in the development of the human being. And I was rather caught by that. She spoke about this in a keynote presentation she gave in Los Angeles late last year. She further notes that there is now the potential for the first time in history to become a 4-generation society. So that alone makes enormous changes, doesn't it, to the way we actually think about our ageing and our relationships with people in community. Bateson asserts that, I quote, "We have inserted a new developmental stage into the life cycle, not an extension tacked on to old age. The very way we think about our ageing needs to change." And I want to share with you part of what Bateson was saying about the process of ageing. And she says, "Ageing today has become an improvisational art form." Isn't that lovely? When you think about it, it's not set in concrete. There are possibilities for us, which I think are really quite exciting as we go forward. An improvisational art form calling for imagination and willingness to learn. Forget about the old dogs can't learn new tricks. You know, that doesn't work anymore. She goes on, "Increased longevity will challenge us not only to revise expectations, but to discover unexpected possibilities. Arranging life in new and satisfying patterns and to explore how newly perceived possibilities relate to earlier life choices." So this comes back to your narrative again and identity. In the process, we encounter gradual or sometimes sudden shifts of consciousness and identity that accompany awareness of the new situation. And so Bateson has named and there are other models around of ageing, but I just felt this was particularly pertinent to where we're going this evening. She's named these adulthood 1 and 2, and she sees this stage as an added stage of life development, and the first stage she talks about. Adulthood 1 is the age of you're setting up this is a new adult, young adult, reproductive time, family, and career development stage. So there are all those functions in the role for the young adult. And then she talks about adulthood 2 as a new time of active wisdom. And she says these people in adulthood 2 have higher levels of energy and the potential to do far more with their lives than the generation before them. And so, what do we do with this? She talks about, this is combined with energy and commitment in the context of a new freedom from some kinds of day-to-day responsibility. And a freedom that challenges expectations and may even be frightening. Now, at the end of 2012, in my 70s, I gave up the administration of the centre that I had founded. I felt it was time for new blood to come in and to take it in new directions. And I really wasn't sorry to lose the roles of doing the administration and chasing grant money and so forth anymore. I actually don't miss that at all. Now, Bateson wrote from an American perspective, but this perspective, I think, seems to apply broadly across Western countries, and as such offers the potential for altering the shape of public and family life. In this new stage of human development, the stage of adulthood too, and you'll notice there's no chronological age put on that, and I'm coming back to that later too. But in that stage, Bateson says that there comes, as well as wisdom, this adulthood 2 stage comes as a gift and offers new choices. Gift, offering new choices. And it's interesting that in 1970, Simone de Beauvoir wrote of the conspiracy of silence on ageing. And to a large extent, that conspiracy of silence on ageing is something to be celebrated. I'm wondering if perhaps that conspiracy at last might be about to be exploded. But it depends on us, doesn't it? It depends on you and I, what we do with these. What are the possibilities for us? And so, gift of ageing. New ways of ageing and being aging societies may only come to fruition if older people see this potential for themselves and others who are part of their communities across the lifespan also become part of this new way of seeing what it means to be human in the 21st century. So let us consider for a moment some of the recent research on social ageing. Dykewald in 2015 at the American Society on Aging conference described the research that Merrill Lynch and his organisation AgeWave have conducted on the 7 key priorities of new maturity he spoke of. And so here's his 7 key priorities from a great deal of research. And so he saw health, family, work, leisure, housing, finances and purpose. Now, about purpose. Purpose is closely associated with meaning and is central for human well-being. In their question of what was most important ingredient to ensure a happy retirement, the respondents in his study clearly identified health as the most single important factor in later life. And this has been found to be so in many contexts over the years, and it underlines the Western societal view held that humans are only of use when they are autonomous and able to make a contribution to society. These attitudes that have been deeply socialised in members of Western societies. And yet, as Frankl wrote, the wish for health is only a means to an end, rather than a goal in itself. And I quote him, health is a precondition for attaining whatever might be considered the real meaning in a given situation. So think about that. It's not just health. Health is a means to an end. And what do we see? What do we mean by health? It's actually interesting that in some of my earlier research, I thinking which stories to include here, and we won't be here all night. Some of the earlier stuff, I did surveys, I confined the way in which older people might actually even express their sense of well-being, and I gave them a scale of from very good health through to poor health. But you know, I didn't give them the option of saying excellent health. Isn't that interesting? And I got a skewed graph coming out of that in fact there were so many of them saying they were in very good health that the next research I did, and the first was with independent living older people, the second was with people who were frail in residential care but cognitively competent. For the frail ones, I actually shifted the questions and gave them the opportunity of saying in excellent health. And I thought, you know, crazy. But you know, quite a number of the people chose excellent health. And I can remember there was one woman coming in a walking frame, and she was really, really bent up, and she had difficulty walking. And I wasn't asking what her medical diagnosis was, or the medical diagnosis of any of them. I asked them, how well would you say you are on this scale? And she said, oh, I'm in excellent health. And it was her perception, and that's her lived experience, which is so important. And then you have to tap into how would someone who's very frail, who's confined in a nursing home, long-term care, feel that life is excellent. She's in excellent health. What hope is there? You know, and sometimes I've been struck by the fact of people so frail and yet inspirational. And so there is something else operating in there that goes to the depth of what it is to be human. And so in this changing world, we need to pause and consider what the attitudes about health, and if I haven't got my health, I want to be have assisted suicide or something. We have to consider the implications of this. We need to pause and consider what these attitudes reflect about who we are and how we relate to each other, including our beliefs that we are really autonomous and owe nothing to anyone. Maybe this new wave of older baby boomers may just challenge societal attitudes at a very profound level. I certainly hope so. And so we have autonomy versus interdependence. But you know, rather than being truly independent, we are interdependent human beings with all the implications that perspective holds. Hospitable communities hold the key to health and well-being in later life. And so at this point, just returning to Browning for half a minute, was he on the right track? Come, grow old with me, the best is yet to come. Aging is a process by which we can learn to know what life is really about. A time when we can come to a new sense of values and attitudes in life, both about our own living and those of our loved ones, as well as the wider community. There remain barriers to opening ourselves to the fullness of life that's possible in later life. And one of these most important barriers is ageism. And ageism has been around for quite a long time, since Robert Butler coined that term back, I think it was in the late 60s. Continues to be one of the biggest problems facing ageing Western societies. Ageing is subtle, and sometimes we can find ourselves indulging in it quite unconsciously, and suddenly pull up and think, oh, yeah. For example, an older person is doing a job and we might question, is he or she up to it? There's a perception that efficiency of older people falls off after a certain age. And I know people keep saying to me, slow down, you know, you're too old, you're retired, go and, you know, slow down, and you shouldn't do so much because I've reached a certain age. And this is tied to chronological age, and we're all different the way we age. At what certain time and age do we slow down? What is appropriate? What kind of role do we look forward to in later life? We don't seem to have really good models for the new vision of ageing, because in fact, when somebody of a great age does something remarkable, we say, oh yes, that's all right for them, but not for all the rest of us. So we kind of dumb it down, we take a negative view to it. So we're still working out the attitudes when retirement age was first set, and I'll come back to that in a moment too. How we look at these added years of life is crucial to our collective as well as our individual well-being. If in effect these added years of healthy ageing are a gift, as I've suggested, what do we do with such gifts? There are two important parts of ageing: our genetic potential and our lifestyle. To actually live those added years of healthy living, we need to live healthy lives. We need to exercise our bodies, our minds, and our spirits. We have opportunities never before realised in Western societies. And to return to the good advice that I'm regularly given about slowing down, in some ways that's about the worst advice you can give, particularly if somebody's not at that stage of life. Okay. It might have been useful 100 years ago when most people lived much shorter lives. They'd worked hard all their lives, slowed down to enjoy the remaining few years before they died. Some people still operate out of this model. Let me share with you that all going well, most of us have about a third of our lifetime in retirement. And for most people, this will be in relatively good health, as long as we continue to use body, mind, and spirit to capacity. And if we hold the fact that this life is a gift, then what we do with this life is important. And so the question, what is ageing for? What is ageing for? Erik Erikson, responsible for the development of the psychosocial developmental theory of ageing, long after he did his continuing work out of Berkeley, published a book on octogenarians in 1996. And the title of the book is quite illuminating. It's called Vital Involvement in Ageing. He and his research team had found over many years of studying this cohort of people that those who found life more satisfying were those who vitally engaged with life. And his 8th stage of psychosocial development, he termed the stage of wisdom, and the task to move to integrity in later life, and the alternative was to move to despair. This new vision of ageing has been with us now for a number of decades. This is not rocket science. This goes back. But often we fail to really live this in our lives, in our workplaces, our communities, or families. And too often we segregate the age groups across society, and this is detrimental to all levels of the age span. You know, it's interesting, barriers that are built up between young and old, and just one of these barriers involves new technologies. There is enormous variation amongst older people as to whether they engage in new technologies or whether they simply find it too hard. And it's really interesting because, people often expect that I won't be able to know which way up a computer is, and I spend a lot of my time at a computer. New technologies are very much part of this emerging phase of human endeavour, and social media forms an important part of the place in the place of lives of many people, both young and old. And I'm sure many of you engage in Facebook, Twitter, whatever else, and in fact your families also. But some people find this difficult. Especially younger people engage in all of these new technologies. But there is evidence of ageism among younger people. It's said to be quite common, and there was a study done recently in 2013 by Levy Chung et al., which looked at Facebook sites that were focused on older people but designed by or created by people who had a mean age category of 20 to 29 years of age. The study, interestingly, and I don't know whether you'll be surprised or not, the study analysed the site descriptors and found 74% excoriated older individuals, 27% infantilised them, and 37% advocated, and wait for it, banning them from public activities such as shopping. Amazing, isn't it? So, yes. But I think when we segregate a society off into age groups, we so often run into the problems of the inner and outer and the sociological perspectives associated with that. Ageism flourishes in a climate of myths and fear of ageing. It's important to examine ageing holistically in present societies to understand better the possibilities and barriers to living in optimum health and well-being in later life. In fact, fear of ageing by older people can even reduce the possibilities open to them as they grow older, affecting mental health and anxiety about ageing. And here I'm drawing on findings from recent studies of MacKinlay and Burns. And what I want to do now is just what we mean by old. What do we actually mean by old? So you should all know this, but I should never say something like that, should I? Old. How old is old? Ways of looking at ageing. Ageing disempowers ageism disempowers older people. It limits the range of opportunities for both older people and for the society as a whole. And I think, we can go the young, old, and oldest old with chronological ages attached, but I really don't think that is very helpful. Okay, and we had statistics before telling us, about the health state of people 65 and over, 75, 85, and the older age group proportionally much larger users of healthcare services, but I don't think that defines people completely. I think it's better for us to think not what the chronological age is, but how well this person is aging, how they are able to function, whatever their age. And so the way we understand old may continually need to be redefined as society ages to avoid assigning people to outmoded roles and expectations of ageing. It's just possible that old by 2100 may be anybody over the age of 100. But perhaps by then we'll stop using chronological ageing as a means of defining human beings. And I just want to follow up on retirement now, the concept of retirement. I think it requires re-examination. As fixed age retirement is no longer the basis for judging when retirement should occur. It's interesting that chronological age is still used as the basis for granting pensions, while it's not used for employment or retirement. The concept of retirement is itself a social construction. And I've been thinking long and hard about this since I was put out to pasture. And so, how we look at ageing makes a difference. Okay. Oh yes, I did have this slide. I've already spoken to that. So that you've got the different kinds of ways of looking at ageing. And so it's contended that ageing is defined differently in different cultures and at different periods of history within a particular culture. Therefore, opportunities and possibilities for older persons within a society may be limited not by the potential of years available, but by society's definition of what is appropriate. In Western societies, the possibility of ageing are changing rapidly, and while structures and attitudes do not always reflect these. One of the factors about ageing and our fears of it is the phenomenal growth of the multi-billion-dollar industry of anti-aging. The potions, pills, and all the promises, the nips and tucks and everything else of the plastic surgery and so forth. There's abundant literature on the economic factors influencing retirement timing. And an article in 2014 by Barak et al., they go further than just considering the economic factors in retirement. They widen the parameters to be considered regarding the basis for retirement. And they introduce the socio-economic factor into the retirement mix, not just the retirement one. And as Barak and colleagues state, it was actually, the Chancellor of Germany, Otto von Bismarck, in 1883, who set forth the age of retirement as 65. Actually, that's the most widely known one. It's just as an aside, he started off with the age of retirement at 70. But in fact, hardly anyone survived to 70, so they didn't have to pay too many pensions. And in fact, even for 65, few people lived that long. There was, at that stage, a much higher proportion of heavy labouring jobs in the workplace. It made it difficult for people to continue working longer, and their health status was much lower than today, and a whole lot of factors have changed. And so now the marked increases in longevity have meant that it's the norm to live beyond 65 years of age. But yet we've got this 65 or even 55 locked in our brains as the time at which we should retire. So what is ageing for? Is there meaning left in ageing? What does it mean? Where does meaning come from in ageing, if not from work? Surprisingly, the people in my first group of participants in my studies, they were all independent living older people, but none of them talked about work as being important to them anymore. That's interesting. But you know, meaning is very much at the heart of what it is to be human. Meaning is closely tied to hope, and hope essential for continuing human existence. There's currently an increasing search by many for meaning and what lies at the centre of life. More frequently in the last couple of decades, what lies, meaning has become associated with spirituality. It is often in a crisis that the human being first reaches outside of themselves in a desperate search for meaning and something greater than themselves. The increasing acceptance of psychology to provide answers to all our problems is resulting in more and more people turning to psychologists to help fix relationships and provide what is missing in their lives. And this is a very valuable service. Yet meaning seems to involve a continuing life search. It's a search that goes to the very depths of what it means to be human. It is a search that often reaches beyond the individual. And this search for meaning has been extensively written on by Viktor Frankl, the Viennese psychiatrist who developed his theory of human search for meaning, published after the Second World War. This search for meaning may be for many a search for transcendent relationship, a sense of otherness missing from their own lives. And in multi-faith and multicultural societies, transcendence may be searched for in many different ways. Many in Western societies still search for transcendence, not sure where they may find it. But surely we must go beyond simply the need to survive. To make life worth living, we need to develop strategies for resilience and to flourish in the process of aging. The alternative is to despair. This elusive factor that makes hope possible is the defiant power of the human spirit, attested to by Kimball. Taking account of the spiritual dimension in later life can be life-giving. Okay. And if we consider life as a spiritual journey, another way using new lenses through which to see our aging journeys, if we consider life as a spiritual journey and to have spiritual resources, we may face bodily decline. We may face the challenges of later life, including the losses and disabilities. We can develop strategies to grow spiritually, to learn how to live with uncertainty. All of this is found in spiritual integrity of aging. And so what is a spiritual dimension? How does it relate to religion, if at all? And I actually was in response to numbers of people who told me that they were spiritual but not religion. And this is back home in Australia. That I thought I want, in separating off the concepts, I don't believe that you can put religion in a basket of its own in a different place that's not related to the spiritual. And so I want to share with you how I see this. And so, ways of mediating spirituality for human beings. The first of these ways is through relationship. And, and I mean, I could go another way here, but the first I'm going to talk about was relationship, intimacy with others and or God. When we talk about relationship from the spiritual perspective, it's expressed as being the deepest of human relationships. Human with human, human with divine. It's about intimacy. And intimacy is a depth of relationship with another human being known as and accepted as I am. It's not this quick and superficial meeting where strangers greet each other and say, have a good day. It goes to the depths. It's something where perhaps you're sitting with a loved one or you're sitting with someone in pastoral care where you suddenly find yourselves in a sacred space, where just being present to one another is a very special and privileged place to be. And so just very quickly, there's a lot more to this, but I'm just flagging that what it's about. So spirituality and relationship, connecting at the deepest of levels. Second part of it is creation and environment, creativity. Now, this model's been growing over the years as I come to understand more about what it actually is. And I like to consider this from two overall perspectives. The natural environment. I suspect that almost everyone responds in some way to the beauty of nature and creation. A beautiful sunrise or sunset. I can remember at one stage in my life where I was going through a rather protracted illness situation. I was in an acute care hospital and had major surgery over about a month, and it was the night nurse who came in the morning and opened the curtains so I could see the sunrise and I could have the hope of a new day that was going to be a new experience and worth living. For the beauty of creation is for everyone on this earth to share. For people with a religious faith, these wonders of God's creation are reasons for joy and thankfulness. As I think about creation, I'm reminded of the creative powers of God, and within this is human creative ability. And you know, when we think about it, that as Jesus came to restore the whole of creation that had been groaning, waiting for the fulfillment of the coming of the Son of God, Romans 8, to restore the whole earth. And you know something, I think that we have not really begun to live out in our lives what it means for us to be co-creators of God, with God, in the whole of our beings. So that's something that we need to think about. What does it mean? It's not simply about entertaining older people and keeping them off the streets. It's so much more than this. How can people be empowered to live their full life potential, no matter what disabilities or anything else that might go wrong? And so, we have these added years of healthy living of gift. What shall we do with the amazing gift? It's interesting that in fact, the next way I want to talk about spirituality being mediated is through the arts. And here we come in, this is human imagination. I had human imagination up there. I'd even put down there meaningful activities and work, because in a sense, we do awful things in workplaces. We bully people, we do all sorts we play games, we disempower people, and life can be pretty hard. But work needs to be redeemed, and perhaps the way we think about post-retirement, what we use as another word for retirement, we need new language to express these things. Maybe we should be fulfilling our creative powers in new ways of working and being that haven't been thought of before. And so it's interesting, even for people with advanced dementia, the way they can respond to art, music, poetry is quite amazing. And sometimes these people who seemingly have all other means of communication lost can respond in these ways. And we've done quite a lot of research in that area too. And so we come to religion. Religion, worship, prayer, reading sacred texts, meditation, the whole lot. And coming out of that, I want to say that even in societies, Western societies, where there are fewer people who are affiliated formally with religion, these aspects of the importance of meaning through symbols, through rituals, it's like it's hardwired into us. And so these parts are important for everyone, not just people of religion. And for a religion to be well functioning, it's going to take in relationship, creativity, the arts into religion. And for people who don't have a religious perspective, they're going to take all of those in and they're going to still respond to liturgies, to rituals of a sacred nature, a secular nature rather than sacred. So it's for all of us. What about dementia? What about suffering? These questions are necessarily associated with the questions of what many ask about the costs of ageing. We've had some of that today. But how to provide for more people living with chronic illnesses, disabilities and requiring end-of-life year, and the need to cater for even larger numbers of people who live with dementia are factors that we need to consider. But also, just to flag something that's changing, for the first time, we see some studies in different parts of the Western world of people living, studies showing decline in the incidence of dementia. And it depends what lenses you have on when you look at it. If you're looking purely through a biological lens, and particularly if you've got association with pharmacological backgrounds and you're wanting to get extra money for research, you're inclined to think of the tsunami of dementia, which is going to happen. But some very, very worthwhile studies are showing decline in the incidence of dementia, even in our ageing societies. And I quote from Matthews et al. 2013, Grasset et al. 2016, and Hospitable et al. 2016. And so they're right up there, and they're European, UK, and US studies, big studies, longitudinal studies. So it's worth, it's worth looking at the whole picture. It's worth looking with eyes open. Sometimes we look in the wrong places for answers. We do need new lenses for considering the possibilities of ageing in any circumstance. We need to consider gerotranscendence, the wisdom of ageing. And these found, particularly wisdom, found even in the very face of physical decline. Meaning is not so much about doing as it is about being and becoming. And so, in conclusion, what is ageing for? Where shall we find meaning in life in the 21st century? And I just want to put a rider here. We often talk about meaning making, but I'm wondering if it's really not making up meaning so much as finding the meaning that's already there for us. And so again, it's how we couch this language, it's how we think about these things. And so, in conclusion, while there may be decline in physiological function and ageing, there remains the potential for continued growth in the psychosocial and spiritual dimensions. However, a lack of depth of the spiritual dimension or an underdeveloped spiritual dimension may impair the individual's ability to find affirmation in what appears to be a shift to greater interiority in a number of older people. If that's true, and I think it is, that everyone has the potential for developing their spiritual dimension. I don't think that spiritual dimension is the preserve of deeply religious people, or it's something which is inherent in every one of us human beings. And so everyone has the potential for developing their spiritual dimension. Some of us may have been really good as physical athletes, Olympians or whatever, and honed our physical bodies. Others have really worked through our intelligence during our lifetimes. Others have developed our spiritual dimension as we've gone through life. So spiritual dimension is so closely tied with deepest meaning than to think of the ageing human beings in terms only of the biomedical paradigm is to demean the worth of the human person. It's to the detriment of family, community, and society. It is through the spiritual that deepest connections are made, and it's through the spiritual that hope to go on even in the bleakest of situations can be found. However, not everybody acknowledges their spiritual dimension. Not everyone even acknowledges it, that the part that meaning plays in finding hope and supporting well-being. At the end, we are free to choose the ways in which we'll live out our human existence. Recent scholarship has affirmed the importance of later life journey involving spiritual tasks and process of ageing, and these tasks are centred around relationship, the search for final life meanings, for developing self-transcendence, and for finding hope. It is what lies at our very hearts that finally, ultimately brings hope, joy, and peace. Thank you.